The postal clerk slammed the window shut right in front of him. "Sorry, old man, we're closing early today," she snaps without looking up. 83-year-old Colonel Frank Morrison stands frozen at the counter, his weathered hands still holding the priority mail envelope containing his grandson's deployment papers. Behind him, a growing line of customers watches as the young woman pretends to organize papers, while deliberately ignoring the elderly veteran who just needs to mail one. Simple package before the military deadline expires tonight. What happens next will leave you speechless. If stories like this remind you why we must never forget our heroes, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments about a veteran who changed your life. This story needs to be heard. Frank Morrison had seen worse days than this one, but somehow the young woman's cold dismissal hit harder than expected. His grandson Tommy was shipping out to Afghanistan next week, and these papers needed to reach the base tonight. No exceptions. The post office should have stayed open for another 30 minutes, but the clerk with the bright pink hair and multiple piercings had decided otherwise. She continued shuffling papers behind the bulletproof glass, making it clear that her shift was over whether the posted hour said so or not. "Sir, you need to leave now," she called out loudly, making sure everyone in line could hear. "We're closed, but the sign says you close at 6, Frank said quietly, pointing to the hours posted on the door. "It's only 5:30. The woman rolled her eyes dramatically and turned to face him fully. "Listen, Grandpa, I don't care what the sign says. I'm telling you we're closed. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow would be too late." Frank knew military deadlines better than most people. He had spent 38 years in the Army, rising from a scared 18-year-old private to a full colonel, who had commanded thousands of troops. But right now, he felt small and helpless. The line behind him was getting restless. A middle-aged man in a business suit checked his watch impatiently. A woman with 2 crying children shifted from foot to foot. An elderly lady with a walker sighed loudly. "Ma single quotes am." Frank tried again, his voice still respectful despite the growing frustration. "This envelope contains military documents for my grandson. He deploys next week, and these papers are required by his commanding officer. Could you please help me send this priority mail?" The clerk laughed, actually laughed, and shook her head. "Oh, great. Another military sob story. You old guys always think you deserve special treatment just because you wore a uniform 50 years ago." Several people in line looked uncomfortable. Now, the man in the business suit stepped closer, curious about what was happening. The woman with children hushed her kids to listen better. Frank felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He had never asked for special treatment in his life. He had earned everything through hard work and sacrifice. But he kept his voice calm and steady, the way he had learned to do when dealing with difficult situations in the field. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Frank said. "I'm asking you to do your job during posted business hours." This seemed to make the clerk even angrier. She stood up from her chair and pointed at him through the glass. "My job? My job is to deal with entitled old men who think the world owes them something." "I don't think so." GRMPS. The businessman cleared his throat. "Excuse me, miss, but he's right about the hours. You are supposed to be open until 6. The clerk spun around to face the new speaker. "Oh, so now everyone's a manager? This is my window, and I decide when I close it. If you don't like it, file a complaint." "But that's not how it works," the woman with children said, stepping forward. "We all need postal services during the posted hours. That's why we're here." Frank watched as more people began to speak up. Older gentlemen near the back of the line nodded in agreement. A young couple whispered to each other, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. The clerk was getting more aggressive by the minute. She slammed her hand on the counter and raised her voice even louder. "You know what? All of you can get out." I'm closing this window right now, and there's nothing any of you can do about it. Frank felt something break inside him. Not anger, but a deep sadness that surprised him. He had fought in 3 wars to protect the freedoms that allowed people, like this young woman, to speak her mind and live her life however she chose. He had watched good men die so that she could have the right to treat him this way, but the sadness quickly turned to determination. His grandson was counting on him, just like his soldiers had counted on him for nearly 4 decades. He would not fail now. The elderly man stepped closer to the window and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of years and experience. Young lady, I understand you might be having a difficult day. We all have them. But there are people in this line who need your help, and you have a responsibility to provide that help during business hours. The clerk snorted with derision. Responsibility? To who? To a bunch of demanding customers who think they own the place. I don't think so, old man. She emphasized the words old man like they were an insult, which made several people in line wince visibly. The disrespect was becoming hard to watch. Frank reached into his jacket pocket, not for any weapon or threat, but to touch the small wooden box he always carried with him. Inside that box was a medal he had never asked for and never felt he deserved. It was a medal that represented the worst and best day of his life. A day when he had saved 17 men from a burning helicopter in Vietnam, getting shot 3 times in the process. He had never used that medal to get special treatment or make himself feel important. Most people never even knew he had it. But right now, surrounded by strangers who were witnessing his humiliation, he drew strength from knowing that he had once been brave enough to run toward danger when others ran away. Miss, Frank said, his voice growing stronger, I'm not asking you to mail this package because I'm old or because I served in the military. I'm asking you to mail it because it's your job and because my grandson needs these papers to serve his country. The same country that gives you the freedom to work here and say whatever you want to say. The clerk leaned forward and her voice turned nasty. Oh, spare me the patriotic speech, Grandpa. Your grandson probably volunteered because he couldn't get a real job, just like you probably did back in your day. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense that something terrible had just happened. The woman holding them looked shocked. The businessman shook his head in disgust. The elderly lady with the walker made a small sound of disapproval. Frank felt like he had been punched in the stomach. His grandson Tommy was one of the smartest, bravest young men he had ever known. Tommy had graduated from college with honors and could have taken any number of high-paying jobs, but he had chosen to serve his country instead. Just like Frank had chosen to serve, and his father before him, and his grandfather before that. The young woman behind the glass seemed to realize she had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her cruelty. What's wrong, Gramps? Did I hurt your feelings? Maybe you should toughen up a little. That's when Frank heard a voice from the back of the line that changed everything. I think you need to look at who you're talking to. Everyone turned to see a young man in military fatigues walking forward through the crowd. He was tall and lean with the bearing of someone who had seen combat. His uniform was clean and pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine. The soldier approached Frank and came to attention. Sir, he said, his voice filled with respect, I couldn't help but notice your bearing and the way you carry yourself. Are you military? Frank nodded slowly. Yes, son. Army. Retired. The soldier's eyes moved to the small wooden box that Frank was now holding in his hand. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what's in the box? Frank hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened the wooden case. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. The bronze star caught the fluorescent lights of the post office and seemed to glow. The young soldier's eyes went wide. He immediately snapped to attention and saluted. The entire post office fell completely silent. "Colonel," the soldier said, his voice cracking slightly, "it is an honor to meet you." Sir. The clerk behind the window had gone pale. She was staring at the medal with a look of shock and growing horror at what she had done. The soldier turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man is wearing the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for valor in combat. Only 3,500 people in American history have ever received this medal. Most of them gave their lives earning it." Frank tried to speak, to tell the young man that he didn't need to make a big deal about it, but the soldier held up his hand respectfully. "Sir," the soldier continued, "would you allow me the honor of helping you mail your grandson's papers?" Before Frank could answer, the post office manager came rushing out from the back office. He had heard the commotion and seen the crowd gathering at the window. When he saw the Medal of Honor in Frank's hands and the pale, frightened look on his employee's face, he immediately understood what had happened. "Sir," the manager said, approaching Frank with obvious respect, "I am so sorry for how you have been treated here today. Please allow me to personally handle your mailing, and please accept my deepest apologies for my employee's behavior." The clerk was now crying behind the window. She seemed to understand for the first time exactly who she had been insulting and dismissing. The weight of her words and actions was finally hitting her. The manager quickly processed Frank's priority mail while the entire post office watched in respectful silence. When he finished, he refused to accept payment for the postage. "Sir," he said, "it's the least I can do." Frank accepted the gesture gracefully, then turned to address the young woman behind the counter. She was still crying, her tough facade completely gone. "Miss," he said gently, "I want you to know that I don't hold any anger toward you. We all make mistakes and have bad days. I hope you can learn from this experience and remember that every person who walks through that door is fighting battles you know nothing about." The clerk nodded through her tears, unable to speak. As Frank walked toward the door, the entire line of customers began to applaud. The soldier saluted him again as he passed. The elderly lady with the walker reached out to touch his arm and whispered thank you. Outside in the parking lot, Frank sat in his car for a few minutes before starting the engine. He looked at the Medal of Honor one more time before closing the wooden box and putting it back in his pocket. He thought about that day in Vietnam when he had earned the medal. He had been a young captain then, leading a rescue mission to save the crew of a downed helicopter. Enemy fire was coming from 3 directions, and the helicopter was burning. Most men would have waited for backup or air support, but Frank had seen the faces of the trapped soldiers through the smoke and flames. They were somebody's sons, somebody's brothers, somebody's fathers. They were counting on him to get them home, so he had run into the fire. He had pulled out 17 men that day, making multiple trips while bullets flew around him. He'd been shot 3 times, but he kept going back until everyone was safe. When it was over and the medics were working on his wounds, all he could think about was writing letters to 17 different families to tell them their loved ones were coming home. Frank started his car and drove home to call his grandson Tommy. He wanted to tell him that the papers were safely on their way to the base, but more importantly, he wanted to tell him how proud he was. That night, as Frank sat in his living room looking at old photographs, he thought about the young woman at the post office. He hoped she would remember this day not as a moment of shame, but as a lesson about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. He also thought about the young soldier who had stepped forward to help him. That young man represented the best of America's military tradition: respect for those who came before, commitment to service, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Most of all, Frank thought about his grandson Tommy, who would soon be serving in a dangerous place far from home. Frank had mailed those papers not just because it was necessary, but because it was his way of continuing to serve, even at 83 years old. The next morning, Frank received a phone call from the post office manager. The young clerk had asked if she could write Frank a letter of apology. She had also volunteered to work extra hours without pay to make up for closing early the day before. Frank told the manager to give the young woman his phone number. When she called later that day, her voice was small and humble. She apologized sincerely and asked if there was anything she could do to make things right. Frank told her the same thing he had told young soldiers throughout his career. The best apology is changed behavior. He encouraged her to treat every customer with respect and to remember that everyone has a story worth honoring. 3 weeks later, Frank received a package in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from the postal clerk and a small American flag pin. She had written that meeting him had changed her perspective on service and sacrifice. She was volunteering at a local veterans hospital and had started a program to help elderly veterans with their postal needs. Frank smiled as he read the letter. This was why he had served all those years ago, and why young people like his grandson Tommy continued to serve today. Not for medals or recognition, but for the chance to make the world a little bit better, one person at a time. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but in everyday places like post offices and grocery stores and bus stops, where the simple act of treating another human being with dignity can change everything. Frank Morrison had won many battles in his long military career, but the quiet victory in that post office might have been the most important one of all.